It was the sound of the drums that first made them uneasy. They were distant at first, like whispers carried by the wind. But as they walked deeper into the forest, the rhythm grew louder, closer. It wasn't the beat of ordinary drums. These drums echoed with a deep, unsettling power, and their hollow sound seemed to vibrate in the bones of the villagers who had stumbled upon the forgotten shrine. In the small village of Iwo, deep in Yoruba land, there were stories that mothers told their children at night, warnings passed down from one generation to the next. One of the oldest stories was about the Ogboni, the secret society that guarded the village's ancient traditions. The Ogboni were said to hold immense power, both over life and death. It was whispered that their shrine was hidden deep in the forest, and that anyone who disturbed it would suffer the wrath of the spirits, but the village had not feared the Ogboni for many years. Over time, the stories became just that, stories. Until one fateful day, four curious villagers decided to find the shrine for themselves. Tund, the eldest of the group, was always the leader, the one who dared to challenge the unknown. His younger brother, Beo, was nervous but followed anyway. Along with them were Edbimp, a strong-willed girl, and Fola, the quiet one who rarely spoke but always observed. They had heard the old tales, of course, but Tund laughed them off. "It's just superstition," he said, pushing aside the warnings. "We'll find the shrine, and maybe we'll see for ourselves what all the fuss is about." The forest was thick with trees, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and forgotten leaves. They had walked for hours, following the barely visible trail that seemed to pull them deeper and deeper into the shadows. The sunlight barely reached the forest floor, and the further they went, the quieter it became. Then they found it. The ancient shrine stood before them, covered in vines, its stones worn smooth by centuries of rain. The carvings on the altar were so old that the images had almost faded, but they could still make out the symbols of the Ogboni, figures with hooded faces, holding objects of power. Edbimp reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold stone. "We should leave. This feels wrong," she whispered, but Tund scoffed. "Nothing will happen," he said, stepping forward to touch the altar. As his fingers made contact with the stone, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The air grew still, and the shadows around them seemed to grow darker. The drums began again, but this time, they were not distant. They came from all directions, pounding in their ears like the heartbeats of the earth itself. Fola's eyes widened in fear. "Tund, what have you done?" he whispered, his voice trembling, but Tund was already stepping away from the altar, holding something in his hand. "Look," he said, his voice eager. "I found a charm. Maybe it's a gift from the Ogboni." It was a small, carved figure, an idol of sorts. It glowed faintly, a soft, eerie light emanating from its surface. As Tund held it up, the ground beneath them rumbled, and the trees around them seemed to shiver. The drums grew louder, pounding so fiercely that it felt as though the forest itself was alive with anger. Suddenly, from the shadows of the trees, figures began to appear. Tall, cloaked figures, their faces hidden in darkness. They moved slowly, gliding across the ground like smoke, and the very air seemed to grow heavier with each step they took. Edbimp gasped. "The Ogboni. They're real." The figure stopped in front of them, and one stepped forward, its voice like a low growl. "You have disturbed the shrine of the Ogboni. You have taken what is not yours." Tund tried to speak, but no words came out. His throat felt tight, as if invisible hands were choking him. The idol in his hand pulsed with an unnatural energy, its glow intensifying. The cloaked figure raised its hand, and suddenly, the sky grew dark. It wasn't just a storm, it was as if the world itself was angry. The wind howled through the trees, and the ground shook violently. Then, in the blink of an eye, the figures vanished, leaving only the echoes of their drums behind. The villagers stood frozen, hearts pounding in their chests. What do we do now? Beo stammered, his voice barely audible. Edbim's face was pale. We need to return the idol. We need to make things right, but as they turned to leave, the forest had changed. The trees no longer seemed welcoming. They twisted and creaked, their branches reaching out like hands to block their way. The path they had walked earlier was now gone, replaced by a thick, unyielding fog that seemed to swallow everything, and then, the whispering started. It was soft at first, just a murmur carried by the wind. But as they walked, the whispers grew louder, as if thousands of voices were speaking to them, accusing them, cursing them. Return what you have taken, or suffer the consequences, the voice echoed in their heads, filling them with fear. They ran, stumbling over the roots and branches, desperate to escape the clutches of the forest. But no matter how fast they moved, the voices followed, always in the distance, always just out of reach. Finally, they reached the edge of the forest. Breathless and shaking. The drums were silent now, but the eerie feeling did not go away. The villagers knew that the Ogboni had marked them, that the curse would follow them unless they made amends. The next day, the village elder, Mama Oloren, called them to her hut. You have angered the spirits of the Ogboni, she said, her eyes stern. You must return the idol to the shrine and offer a proper apology to the ancestors, or you will not be free of the curse. With no choice, turned and the others returned to the forest, hearts heavy with fear. They placed the idol back on the altar, whispering their apologies to the spirits. The moment the idol touched the stone, the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The oppressive weight lifted, and the sky cleared, but even after they left the shrine, the villagers knew that the Ogboni never truly forgot. From that day on, they remembered the importance of tradition, of respect for the ancestors, and the warning, never disturb the sacred spaces of the past. The drums of the Ogboni, they say, still echo in the wind sometimes, especially on dark, quiet nights. The end.